Right, so we're going to go ahead and use our two-way table from our first example to go through and answer some different percent related questions using our percent equation. Right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in these totals that we saw before in our previous table on the previous page. Right, so again, remember that we found those totals by adding across our rows and columns, and we get a total of 13 here. Okay, so our first question is asking what percent of the sample are men. Going back to the previous page, right, we have our basic percent equation, percent equals whole times part. Right? Then we also have, as we're looking at these, we have those three different alternate versions of our formula that were also listed at the bottom of the previous page, page 9 in the notes. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write out the direct formula. Right? Percent equals part divided by whole. Right? When we're looking for a percent, we are using division. Right? So in this particular case, right, what percent of the sample are men? Right? Well, we have 5 males, so that's our part, and then our whole is our total. Right? So our whole is going to be 13. Right? Then we're going to go ahead and plug this into a calculator to divide it, and we get 0.3846, and then it keeps going and going after that. Right? This one doesn't kind of work out nicely. Right? We want to change this to a nice looking percent. We're going to round to 0.1%, so one decimal point or one value after our decimal point unless we're told otherwise. So if we shift this over to places, right, our decimal point is going to land between the 8 and the 4. That 6 is going to make that 4 round up to a 5. So we have 38.5%. Right, and then we're going to use our same formula for our next example. Right? Percent equals part divided by whole. What percent of the sample are women? Right, well, we have 8 females divided by 13. Right, so again, we're just going to type it into our calculator. We get 0.61538. Right, it keeps going and going and going. So same thing, we're going to shift our decimal point 2 places to the right. This time we have a 3 next to the 5, so it's going to round down, meaning we're not going to change that 5, so this rounds to 61.5%. Right, so as we're working through these, again, we're going to use our calculator to do the basic division, and then just make sure you're rounding appropriately. Again, for the most part, I'm going to round to 0.1% as you're working through the homework. Make sure you're following the instructions in each individual problem. All right. What percent don't always wear seatbelts? Right. Well, our percent here, we're going to use our same formula actually for both of these next two, so I'm going to just write it right in there for both of these. Right. We're still doing part divided by whole. Right. So the number of people that do not always wear our seatbelt is 5 divided by our total of 13. Which actually gives us the same answer that we saw in part, the first part of part C. Right? So that gives us our 0.3846, so on and so forth, which we rounded to 38.5%. And similarly, what percent always wear seatbelts? Right? Well, always is 8 out of 13, right? Just like we got in the other part of C. Right? 0.61538, so on and so forth, rounds to 61.5%. Right? So when we're looking for our percent, just remember we're always taking our part divided by our whole. Right? Then E is a little bit different. Are the men in the sample more likely than the women to take the risk of not wearing a seatbelt? Why? All right, so let's start with the men. All right, so the percent of men, remember, is our percent is still going to be our part divided by our whole. Right? The percentage of men that do not always wear seatbelts, well, we have 2, right, that do not always wear seatbelts out of a total of 5. So 2 divided by 5 gives us 0.4, which is 40%. All right, then let's take a look at the women. Again, same formula, percent equals part divided by whole. All right, the number of women that do not always wear seatbelts is 3, divided by the total, which is 8. 3 divided by 8 is 0.375, which then if we shift our decimal point over, no rounding necessary, we just get 37.5%. All right, so we're asked, are the men in the sample more likely than the women in the sample to take the risk of not wearing a seatbelt? Why? Right, so this is where that last step in our previous section comes into play. We want to make sure that we finish this off with an interpretation. We want to make sure we answer our original question. Our original question, are the men in the sample more likely than the women to take the risk of not wearing a seatbelt? We're going to say yes, because the percentage of men is higher. Right, 40% of men do not always wear a seatbelt in this sample. 37.5% of women do not always wear a seatbelt from this sample. Right? So 40% is higher than 37.5%, so we're going to use that again to do our final interpretation and to answer this question.